Zhang Henshui's Golden Fen Family Chapter 46, Deep Brotherhood, Deceiving the Old Father, and the couple's talk of bitter lotus tongue to tease the beloved. Minzi saw that his mother was in trouble, so he pretended to be worried. Mrs. Jin then said to her, "Go to the front and see this thing." "What is he doing?" Minzi said, "I said it. Mother has the final say and agrees. Why bother making such a fuss?" Mrs. Jin said, "Why do I have anything against them? But now, your father is fully aware of the content of this incident. If I want to do something, I have to explain it clearly to your father before I can do it. You don't care about anything else. Let's calm him down with a few good words first." Tao Jidao said, "When people are angry, they are desperate. If he says he wants to become a monk, it is better to believe that he is telling the truth than to believe that he is scary." He said to Minzi, "What are you standing here listening to? Why don't you go quickly?" Minzi stood by the door, holding the curtain with his hands and obeying the words, smiling. First he was indifferent, but as soon as he was reminded, he became anxious. "Now for a while, I went to drag him here. Mom should tell him if she has anything to say." So he went to Yanxi's house in front, and outside the window, he saw the lights inside. Minzi put his head close to the glass window and looked in through the window screen. He saw Yanxi sitting on a chair in a daze. There was a portable suitcase with the lid opened and things piled up randomly inside. Yanxi looked at the box and saw that a hesitant look. Minzi stepped back and called out to Lao Qi. Yanxi agreed in the room. "Don't come. I'm taking off my clothes and going to bed. I won't open the door." Minzi knew that he was not sleeping, so he didn't care, stepped forward and pulled the door, and the door opened. As soon as he walked into the door, Yanxi was not sitting there, but picking up things in the box. Minzi said, "What are you doing? Do you really want to leave?" Yanxi said, "What's the benefit of such a family? It's better to leave, and you can be free." While talking, he looked for things in the house again. "Install into the box." Minzi stepped forward, took Yanxi's hand, and said with a smile, "I am here to be a matchmaker. If you have anything to say, you should tell me directly. That is the truth. You resort to these tricks in front of me? Do you think you can scare me like this?" Yanxi said, "Why should I scare you? Didn't I pretend to be like this before you came to see me?" Minzi said with a smile, "Don't be so strong. Just now I saw you sitting here hesitating outside the glass window, because when you heard my words, you stood up and packed the box again. Isn't this obviously for me? You have to listen to me carefully. We are coming up with ideas together, and I have something to discuss. If you do this to me, you are obviously not sincere to me. What else can I come up with? From now on, you do what you do, and I do what I do, and I don't care." After that, he turned around and walked out. Yanxi grabbed him and said, "Are you still angry with me?" Minzi said, "I'm not angry with you, but you are angry with me. You don't accept my favor anyway, so what else can I say?" She smiled and said, "In that case, I will accept your favor, but I don't know if you have any good ideas to tell me." Minzi said, "Don't you want to become a monk? Why? Do you think of any other ideas?" Yanxi said, "That was a last resort. As long as there is a way, I will naturally not become a monk. I will thank you. Here." After saying that, he handed over his hand. Minzi smiled and said, "I can't stand this. The method I told you will bear the guilt of deceiving the emperor. Now I go in and say that you are very determined, and will leave soon. I will pay for it. Don't open the door for you. This way, you don't have to pretend to leave, just lie down on the bed and cover your head with the quilt. When I come in, I'll give you whatever you want," Yanxi said. "The method is good, but it must be kept secret. If the news is leaked, not only will the whole situation be ruined, but my reputation will be ruined." Minzi smiled and said, "Do you still cherish your reputation?" Yanxi was about to refute this sentence. Minzi waved his hands repeatedly and said, "Stop talking nonsense. I'll go right away. You can just follow the plan." Minzi walked to the upper room, almost to Mrs. Jin's window, let go of his steps, made a fluttering sound, and ran towards the house. When Mrs. Jin saw her coming in, she asked, "How is it? What did he say?" Minzi pretended to be very sad, and said, "This child has a really bad temper. There is no room for improvement. He has to leave." Mrs. Jin stood up, looked at Minzi's face and said, "What now?" Minzi said, "I told the first concierge not to open the door, but he was already angry and fell asleep. It may be okay tonight, but no one can take this risk tomorrow. After hearing this, Mrs. Jin sat down calmly and said, I didn't say I was completely unwilling. Why did he break up like this? Tell him that as long as his father doesn't object, I will let him do it. Dao Jidao said, that's not all. If he was satisfied, he would have stopped talking and left. Mrs. Jin said, in addition, I also said, what can I do? Dao Zi smiled and said, I can only ask you, old man, to stand up in front of my father and work hard to make this happen. Mrs. Jin said, how can I help your father? Don't you know? I think it's easier for you to tell the old man about this and let me take the lead. Daozi lowered his head and thought about it, then said with a smile, I'll do this for you. I have an idea. If I don't do it, I can definitely get Dad to agree. Mrs. Jin said, you are helping Lao Qi in this matter, so you should do it as a favor and go ahead with it. I don't think it's easy. What can you do? Daozi said with a smile, this is a secret that must not be leaked. If the news is leaked tomorrow, it will not be easy. Runzi said with a smile, this is like Zhuge Liang in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, making people listen to it, so, and so. Dao Jidao, actually, it doesn't mean much if you say it, but when it is published in the future, it will lose a lot of interest. So I have to say it at that time. Runzidao, let me guess what the method is. Minzidao, don't guess. Once you say it, the words will reach my father's ears. Let's go. I'll go check on that one first. How is he doing now? With that said, he knocked on Yanxi's door again. When Yanxi heard Minzi's voice, she got up and opened the door. She smiled and said, fifth sister is here now. There is a 80% chance of things happening. Minzi repeated what he just said. Yanxi clapped her hands and said, she must be sure of what she said. At this point, she heard coughing in the corridor. Minzi said, you'd better lie down, and keep lying until the end. Yanxi fell on the bed and pulled the quilt to cover her. But Daozi walked into the room and asked, where is Lao Qi? Yanxi remained silent. Dao Jidao, are you asleep? Yanxi still remained silent. Dao Zi stepped forward, flipped up the quilt, and opened most of it, and said, are you lying in front of the military advisor to play tricks? Yanxi sat up with a smile, and said, I don't dare to wrong you. I'm afraid of you. There are others behind me. I heard that the fourth sister has come up with a wonderful plan for me, but I don't know how it works. Can I participate in it? Dao Jidao, of course you can participate. Only you can do it. When Dao Zi said this, he held the door open, stretched his head and looked outside. When he saw that there was no one outside, he closed the door. The three sisters discussed it, and Minzi clapped his hands and said with a smile, it turns out that this is a plan, and it is something that a gentleman can deceive. Yanxi said, don't yell, no matter who you let know, this matter, it's not easy to handle. Minzi and Daozi left without saying much. Yanxi then got up and wrote a letter and gave it to Jin Rong, asking him to send it out early the next morning without delay. Then go to sleep peacefully. At 11 o'clock the next day, Yanxi fell asleep and had not yet gotten up. Mrs. Jin sent people to visit several times to inquire about his actions and not let him go. When she saw that he was sleeping peacefully, she let it go. She followed Daozi's words and never told Jin Quan. Jin Quan had his own affairs in the political and financial world, and he just put aside minor family issues as soon as he mentioned them. After a day, no one mentioned it, just like clouds passing through the sky, leaving no trace. It was Sunday. After Jin Quan read the newspaper on the table, he went to his study room as usual and read one or two of his favorite poetry collections. Unexpectedly, when he walked into the study room, he saw a green silk crepe scarf on his desk, and there was actually some fragrance that filled the room. Looking again at the box of fat-colored red clay that I loved, I didn't know who had opened the lid or not. When he felt angry, he couldn't help but said to himself, who is this who is causing mischief here? As he said this, he picked up the scarf and saw that the two foreign letters TT were embroidered on it with white silk thread. Jin Quan knew that this was the abbreviation of Tao, and said to himself, this old man is also so unruly. So he covered the ink pad, put the scarf aside, and took a cigarette to himself. Read this book. Not long after, Daozi came in with a smile, holding a book of banknotes in his hand. He put the book of banknotes on the table nonchalantly and put it on with a scarf. Jin Quan put down the book he was holding and took a quick look at it. He saw a very charming inscription written on the notebook, which was the words Nenhong Pavilion Collection. He said, "This seems to be a poem written by a lady. Where did it come from?" Dao Jidao said, "It's a friend of mine, very young. Take a look, old man. How is this poem done?" She asked me to compose one. Preface: I just wrote a few sentences, used the ink pad here, and stamped it with a seal. Jin Quan smiled and said, "Among the female students now, are there any good poems?" As he was talking, he casually took the notebook over and accidentally opened a page. He saw that it was made of high-quality rough paper and had neatly written characters in block letters, but there was a red pen on the side to circle the sentences one by one. On the top of the scroll page, there are also small characters written with eyebrow approval. Jin Quan smiled and said, "This seems serious, just like a collection of poems by famous people." Dao Jidao said, "You haven't read the content, so don't criticize it yet. After you read a few poems, you can say whether it is good or not." Jin Quan said, "Sure enough." He opened a page at random and read a poem called Qingqiu first. The poem said, "Don't ask things about old things. Look at the flowers as they were last year." Jin Quan couldn't help but praise, "Ah, the style of writing is very suitable for Sheng Mo. What do you think of what I said?" Jin Quan smiled and read the poem again. "How will the flowers be like next year?" Jin Quan said, "That's right. Some of the comments just sounded a little bit decayed, but they weren't very good." I turned another page and read a few songs, all of which were close to the point. They were generally fair. Later I saw a song with 7 rhymes and many close circles around it. The topic is suburbia. The poem says, 10 miles of weeping poplars line the road, and in spring the greenery becomes flat. The fragrance sticks to the clothes for a long time with the warmth, and the wind blows the hairspring and sticks to the temples. There are villages at the foot of the mountains surrounded by trees, and warblers are singing everywhere in front of the horses. Why should the temple bell urge returning guests? Most of all, secluded people love wonking. Jin Quan stroked his beard with his hand, nodded and said, "This child has talent, but unfortunately she has no creativity. If she becomes my teacher, I can correct her shortcomings and help her become a female poet." Daozi said, "Why do you say she is so unsuccessful? Do you have any evidence?" Jin Quan pointed and said, "Take this poem as an example. At first glance, it seems to be well balanced, and a very beautiful poem. But when you study it, it is all complete. The line 'The weeping willows are on both sides of the road' has only one slanted character changed. The next couplet is based on the line 'The rain of apricot blossoms wets my clothes, and the wind of willows blows on my face without making me feel cold.' The middle couplet is even more obvious, and is based on the line 'There are flowers in Lanjuan that are all attached to cranes, and there are no trees on the women's wall that are not inhabited by phoenixes.' At the end, she even used a line from Li Yishan, 'A hermit loves the late sunshine.' Her real line of poetry is just, 'The spring fields are green at first sight.' Ah, who wrote this marginal note? How can I flatter her so much? How amazing. What is the poem like the person? What is the poem with the painting? But then again, it is still difficult for her. People who are almost the same can really be deceived by her." Deo Zideo, I don't agree with what you said. Although I don't understand poetry, I think it sounds very nice when I recite it. For example, what you said just now, that there are cranes on every flower and phoenix on every tree. I think it is very abstract. She said that there are villages around the trees at the foot of the mountain, and orioles singing everywhere in front of the horse. Close your eyes and think about it. If you were sitting in a carriage, walking on the main road of Zishan, looking at the village in the distance and listening to the birds singing, her poem was not wrong at all. Jin Quan laughed and said, "How can this be? Could it be that she stole someone else's poem and wanted to be better than him?" Deo Zideo, this is called the disciple surpassing the master. Jin Quan said, "This child is quite smart, so this way, it is not that I intentionally plagiarize the works of the ancients, but I have read the poems thoroughly, and whenever I have any thoughts, I feel that they are in line with the ancient poems, and I just can't resolve them. Therefore, I will unconsciously use the ancient sentences. This is exactly because talent is better than human effort. People who are willing to use human effort will ponder every word, and after using a sentence, they will wake up after studying it and will never use it. This requires a very discerning teacher to give strict instructions." Daozi smiled and said, "Where can I find such a teacher?" It is better to become your disciple. Jin Quan stroked his beard and said, I have disciples, but I have never accepted a female disciple, and I don't know her. Daozi said, she is a friend of Lao Qi. Jin Quan took the copy and looked at the marginal notes again, smiling, and said, isn't this Yanxi's handwriting? Such a ghost-written handwriting is not the same as that of people. When compared with the good handwriting of others, there is really a world of difference. It's a shame that he has the nerve to write it in someone else's book. Daozi said, is the handwriting good? Jin Quan said, the handwriting is really good. It's just right to write in this kind of copybook. I think this child must be very pretty. Daozi said, of course he is pretty. Didn't our seventh brother say that his poems are like his person? If you don't believe me, I'll show you a photo. At this time, he reached into his pocket and took out a 4-inch half-length photo with a paper shell. He stretched out his hand and handed it to Jin Quan, saying, this is this person. Jin Quan said, look at other people's works. Why do you carry other people's photos with you? Daozi said, this photo was originally in the book, and it was sent together. When Daozi said this, he held the photo in his hand but didn't hand it to him, but just compared it with Jin Quan's face. Jin Quan smiled and said, she is very pretty. Daozi smiled and said, how about I make her your fourth daughter-in-law? Jin Quan said, is a playboy like Yanxi worthy of marrying such a girl? Daozi smiled and said, don't worry about whether it is worthy or not. If Lao Qi can marry such a girl, do you agree or not? At this point, Jin Quan suddenly realized. He deliberately asked, after all this fuss, who is this girl? Daozi said, it's written in the book. You will know it after you read it. Jin Quan turned it over and saw that it was written as Leng Qingqiu Wei Ding Cao. He put the book down and said nothing. Daozi smiled and said, such a girl, even from your perspective, is both talented and beautiful. Why don't you agree with Lao Qi's marriage this time? Jin Quan said, it's not that I don't agree, but what he did was a bit sneaky, so I was very suspicious. Daozi said, who cares how they met? As long as the talent is good, it's fine. Jin Quan said, I can tell the character of this child from her photos and poems, but she is not very lucky. Daozi said, this is superstitious talk again. I don't believe in fortune-telling, let alone judging people by their poems. Jin Quan said, what do you know? The ancients said that poetry expresses one's will and the exhalation of the earth. Daozi shook his hands and laughed. Enough, enough. I don't study that. Jin Quan smiled and said, I know you have worked hard for Yanxi's affairs, but what good does it have for you? Daozi said, how can I benefit from his marriage? But I think this woman is very good, and Lao Qi has a good relationship with her. It's a pity that they lost their marriage. Even if I can't agree, it's just because the process of their marriage has never been made public. But this little thing can't be thrown out because of choking. Dad, I think you agree, right? As he said this, he found a match and walked to Jin Quan to light the cigar in his mouth. He took the opportunity to stand beside Jin Quan, just laughing and not leaving. Jin Quan sat down silently and just smoked. Daozi smiled and said, so you have acquiesced. I will let them start to prepare for the wedding. Jin Quan said, why are they so busy? Daozi heard this and left, walked out of the study, and ran to Mrs. Jin's room in one breath. When she entered the room, Pai Feng happened to be coming out and bumped into her. She didn't feel anything, but Pai Feng was pregnant and had a strange pain in her stomach. She gritted her teeth and stood against the door without moving, but tears couldn't help flowing out of her eyes. She just smiled bitterly and said, what's wrong with you? Mrs. Jin came over and asked, this is not a joke. Did you bump into anything? Don't hide it. Daozi smiled and said, sister-in-law, really, did I bump into you? As he was about to reach out to touch her, Pai Feng threw her hand away and said with a smile, nonsense. Then she held the door and walked away. Daozi then smiled and clapped his hands and said, it's done, it's done. How about my plan? What about old Seven? After saying this, she ran out to find Yanxi and told him what he wanted to say. Yanxi had nothing else to say, but smiled and bowed to Daozi. Daozi smiled and said, how is it? I told you my brilliant plan. If it doesn't work, then it won't work. But if we put it into practice, it will work. Yanxi said, I have admired you for a long time, but I didn't dare to tell you. If I had known you were so enthusiastic, I would have entrusted you with it a long time ago, and the matter would have succeeded a long time ago. Now I just hope that fourth sister will do her favor to the end and get it done quickly. I mean, bring the person to our house within a month. Do you think it's faster? Daozi said, not only faster, it's too fast. Yanxi bowed repeatedly and said, no matter what, I hope this matter can be done. As for the wedding, I am not afraid of keeping it simple. I can just follow the method of the new characters and hold a tea party. Daozi said, people say that when love reaches a fever pitch, you have to get married. I think your love may have reached a fever pitch. Why is it so urgent? Yanxi said, I have my own reasons for this. You will know it naturally after a long time in the future. You don't have to ask now. Anyway, I have my own difficulties. Daozi said, Mom can make the decision on these things. As long as I try a little bit for the things that Mom decides on, Yanxi hurriedly continued, then there will be no failure. Mom originally believed in what you said, and what you said was organized, so Mom would naturally agree to it. Daozi smiled and said, don't flatter me, nonsense. I don't accept it. Yanxi smiled and said, I am not good at anything, even flattering people. Daozi said, you have a skill. You are very good at serving friends of the opposite sex. I don't understand. Miss Leng, who is both talented and beautiful, would like you. Yanxi said, don't say this in the future. It will be embarrassing for me. Now let's just talk about business. How about I mention this issue? As he said, he tilted his head and smiled foolishly at Daozi. Daozi was very proud of this matter, and Yanxi said that he wanted to advance the wedding date, and he patted his chest and agreed. After dinner in the evening, in Mrs. Jin's room, as usual, there was a talk between the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, mother and daughter. Daozi brought the child and sat casually beside the soft couch where Mrs. Jin was lying. The little Bai held a foreign girl in his left hand and took a piece of rose egg pancake in his right hand and just put it to the foreign girl's mouth and said to it, eat a little, eat a little. Mrs. Jin reached out and stroked Bai's hair and smiled, silly child, it won't eat it. Bai said, how can the little brother of the Liu family eat it? Mrs. Jin smiled and said, the brother is raised and the foreign girl is bought. Pai Feng asked with a smile, which one do you think is better, a younger brother or a foreign girl? Bai said, a younger brother is better. Aunt, please raise a younger brother for me tomorrow. This made everyone in the room laugh. Daozideo said, are you sure it's a younger brother? If it's really a younger brother, Grandma will like the younger brother and not you. When Bai heard this, he ran to Mrs. Jin and said with a smile, Grandma, I will play with you and sleep with you. Mrs. Jin picked him up, kissed him, and said with a smile, you little thing, you are so naughty, and your words are really funny. Daozideo said, Mom, these servants have all given birth to children. That's really a lot. How can you love them all? Mrs. Jin said, how can you not love them all? I'm different from others. No matter how many, I treat them the same. Daozideo said, Mom, I have a criticism for what you said. Just take the seventh child's marriage as an example. You are not as happy as you were with the marriages of your other children. Mrs. Jin said, I have agreed to everything. You can do whatever you want. How can I not be happy? Daozi said with a smile, can you really be so happy? There are so many people here. It's hard to take back your words. Mrs. Jin also said with a smile, you have used some tricks in front of your father, and now you are using tricks in front of me. You said that you obviously have something to say. Daozi said, with a smile, how dare I use any tricks? For example, when I mentioned the wedding date of Lao Qi, didn't you say that we would talk about it next year? But Lao Qi still wants to do it right away. If you agree to it, I will do it according to his way. Mrs. Jin said, there is nothing wrong with doing it according to his way, but I don't understand why he is so anxious. Daozi said, I don't know much about this, but I heard that the mother of this Leng girl is going back to the south. If the wedding date is still early, she will take the girl away. Lao Qi is always afraid that he will not come back at any time, so he would rather get married first. Mrs. Jin said, why is it so coincidental? Daozi said, it's because they are leaving that Lao Qi is so worried. Mrs. Jin said, I have agreed to the marriage. It will be held sooner or later, so what's the problem? But the earliest it can be held will be a month later, because many things have to be prepared slowly. Daozi said, according to Lao Qi, there is no need to hold anything, just a tea party will be enough. Pai Feng laughed and said, isn't that a joke? Many of our relatives and friends don't understand and say that we are using this as an excuse to save money. How can we save face? Daozi saw that things were getting ready, and Pai Feng came to interject like this, and he was very unhappy. Turning around, he said, "What's the big deal? They say we are saving money, but they don't say we are wasting money." Pai Feng was already very unhappy because she was touched by Daozi during the day. This time, she hit a nail again and was really angry. But she always gave in to the girls, so she said nothing. Yufan was sitting in the corner of the room, but she snorted and sneered. Daozi saw Yufan like this, and knew that she was still angry and had a mocking attitude. But she made up her mind, and would never pay attention to any obstacles from them. She just glanced at Yufan and let it go. She deliberately smiled and said to Mrs. Jin, "If you are afraid of trouble, leave everything to me. I will definitely do it." Well, Runzi on the side tried her best to instigate, and Mrs. Jin was surrounded by their sisters and had to agree. She said, "In this case, I don't care about the date. Let Aki decide it by himself. How much money he wants to spend, let him draw up a list himself. I will consider it and call him to do it. I have a few words to ask him." When I turned around, I saw Qingqiu standing by the door, slowly cutting her fingernails with a pair of small scissors. Then I said, "Qingqiu, you are here to inquire about the news again. I understand everything. It would be a good idea to let you go to the newspaper office to be an interviewer tomorrow. Call Qi to me." Qingqiu chuckled and turned around to call Yanxi. Yanxi was waiting for news at home. He was happy to know that the matter had come to an end. However, he had broken up with his family. At this time, he suddenly turned his face and turned from sadness to joy and felt embarrassed. So he just took a few novels and huddled in the room to read them randomly. When Qingqiu pushed the door, she shouted, "Qi, you are very happy." Yanxi smiled and said, "What is the great news?" Qingqiu smiled and said, "The matter has been so chaotic. Do you still want to hide it? This new young lady, I heard she is good looking. Do you have a photo? Let me see it first." Yanxi smiled and pushed her, and said, go out, don't bother." Qingqiu said, "Yes. Now there is a young mistress, so we don't need to serve her anymore, but I'm not here to trouble you." Madam said, "Please go." Yanxi said, "Did Madam ask me to go? Don't talk nonsense." Qingqiu said, "How dare I talk nonsense? If I don't go, I will delay things." Yanxi wanted to not go, but he was really afraid of delaying things. He felt a little embarrassed to go, so he said, "You go first. I'll come." Qingqiu dragged his clothes and said, Go. Why are you embarrassed?" Yanxi smiled and said, "Don't bother, I'll go." Qingqiu was in front, and Yanxi only walked to the door of Mrs. Jin's room. Mrs. Jin saw that he was wearing a beige tweed suit, a big goose yellow bow tie, and his hair was combed smooth and shiny, with a half slit in the middle. So she said, "Are you going to be a monk?" Monks dress so fashionably. Yanxi just stood there and laughed. Daozi said, "Come in. What are you standing outside for? Mom has agreed to everything you want to do. Now I'm asking you how much it will cost. Write a bill yourself." Yanxi heard this, and still smiled, refusing to go in. Mrs. Jin couldn't help laughing when she saw him. She said, "After all, you're not as shameless as the eldest and third sons. It will probably be enough in a year or two. Do you have anything else to say? If you don't say it, I won't do it." Yanxi was forced to say, "My words will be represented by my fourth sister." After that, he turned around and left. In Mrs. Jin's room, they were still talking and laughing. Pai Feng stretched lazily and said, "What happened today? I'm very tired. I'm going to sleep first." After saying that, she also went back to her room. Just as she entered the room, Yufan also came. Yin said, "Sister-in-law, what do you think of the seventh brother's marriage this time? It's too hasty. I'm afraid there will be no good results." Pai Feng said, "Don't talk about the future. I don't know why it is arranged like this." Yufan said, "I think so too. The Jin family cares about face and everything. Why are they so careless about such an important matter as marriage? You will regret it in the future." Pai Feng sighed and said, "I can't even take care of my own affairs, so how can I have time to get angry about these things?" Yufan said, "What's the matter? Is the eldest brother still not coming back?" Pai Feng said, "That's right. What does it matter if he doesn't come back? Even if he never comes back, I won't look for him." But now he has formed another branch family. Those who know about it say that he is making trouble. Those who don't know will blame me for causing such a break. So I must have him come back to get to the bottom of it. I originally told Lao Qi that if he didn't come back, he would ask Lao Qi to take me to find him. Unfortunately, Lao Qi himself had marital problems, and he was busier than anything else these 2 days, so my matter had to be delayed. Yufan said, I want my eldest brother to live outside, which is very expensive. It's better to bring his people back together. Pai Feng said with a stern face, I can't do this. What kind of family are we? Why do we bring prostitutes into our home? Don't ruin our family's reputation. Yufan said, it's done. What are you going to do? Pai Feng said, why can't we do it? Either she leaves or I leave. He can leave one of the two. Yufan smiled and said, what you said is not right again. With your status, how can you fight with that kind of person? Let me and Peng Zhen go and talk, and let him send a message to my eldest brother to ask him to come back. Pai Feng said, I'm afraid it won't be effective even if Lao San goes to talk. To be honest, they are all the same batch of goods. Yufan said, it is only because they are the same kind of people that we can ask him to speak. Peng Zhen is a person who speaks differently to different people. If I talk to him in a reasonable way, he can't make trouble and will definitely discuss our intentions with my elder brother. Slowly, Pai Feng said, is what you said really effective? It's worth a try. How to talk to him? Yufan said, then you don't have to worry about it. I have my own way. Pai Feng said with a smile, you can say whatever you want, but you are not allowed to talk about my affairs. Yufan said with a smile, you are smart and guessed it at once. Do you think, apart from this, what other way can you blackmail him? I will tell him honestly and bluntly that you are very angry and decided to go to the hospital to have the abortion. At this time, he has to come back privately to solve it with you. Pai Feng said, no. I don't use this method to treat him. Yufan said with a smile, what's the big deal? He is holding you hostage, and you can also hold him hostage. Sun Peng is fighting spirit, and he wins cleverly. I will go and tell her now, and I guarantee it will be effective tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. After she finished speaking, she turned around and was about to leave. Pai Feng stepped forward, held her hand, and said, don't talk nonsense. Even if you tell me, I won't admit it. Yufan said, I originally wanted you not to admit it. The more you deny it, the more it seems that the words we spread are true. Once you admit it, it seems that we agreed to scare him. Pai Feng pouted and said, no matter what, I won't let you say it. Yufan didn't say much, and actually left with a smile. Yufan walked back to her room and saw Peng Zhen wearing a hat, as if he was going out. So she said to herself, they are always making trouble, day and night. You see, they will not stop until someone dies. That day is coming soon. It won't be long. After hearing this, Peng Zhen stopped walking and turned around and asked, what are you talking about here alone? Who wants to commit suicide again? Yufan said, anyway, this matter has nothing to do with you, so you don't need to ask. Peng Zhen said, if you put it that way, it's true. As he spoke, he took off his hat and said, tell me, who is quarreling with whom? Yufan said, it doesn't matter if I tell you, but don't tell Big Brother. If you tell him, he will say that we are moving wrong. Don't you know? Big sister-in-law made him very angry. I heard her tone, and she actually wanted to go to the hospital for an abortion. Peng Zhen was stunned and looked at Yufan's face and said, why? Yufan said, it won't matter if you have an abortion. This method is very correct. At this point, a slight smile appeared on her face. She lay down on the soft chair and snorted. Maybe someone will follow suit. Peng Zhen said, Chinese women don't understand anything. Abortion is a criminal offense and must be punished. If it is not done well, you may be sentenced to a third-class fixed-term imprisonment. Yufan said, don't scare me with your big words. I can't be scared. Do you think you are afraid of Chinese laws when you go to a foreign hospital? Peng Zhen said, unless it is an irrelevant hospital, a reputable hospital will not do such a thing. Yufan said, who cares? As long as the matter can be done. What does it have to do with the parties involved whether the hospital has an identity or not? Peng Zhen said, if you really want to make trouble like this, I will go to my mother to confess and say that you have bad intentions and want to wipe out the Jin family. Yufan stood up and spat in Peng Zhen's face. She said, with a stern face, You still think you are the seed of civilization, but you say such corrupt words. Peng Zhen dodged, and said with a smile, "Why are you so fierce?" Yufan said, "Shouldn't you be punished for saying this? You think that people who are a little civilized now should pay attention to birth control. Your words obviously have the meaning of advocacy. Shouldn't I spit on you?" Peng Zhen said with a smile, "I didn't expect your ideas to be so new. But birth control before success, after success, there will be suspicion of murder." Yufan said, "You are talking more and more nonsense. I won't argue with you. Let's ride on the donkey to read the imperial calendar. Wait and see." Peng Zhen smiled and said, "It's fun, it's true. You can tell your sister-in-law about this. Don't do anything stupid." Yufan just smiled and ignored him. Peng Zhen remembered what he said, stretched out his hand to take the hat off the hook, and held it in his hand. He wanted to leave in his heart, but was afraid of Yufan's questioning. But Yufan knew that he was going to report, and usually liked to ask, but today he just pretended to be vague, as if he didn't know anything. Peng Zhen slowly put on the hat and said, "What's the matter?" "Nothing. I'm going to go out." Yufan twisted her body and said, "Who cares about you?" Peng Zhen said, "Because you usually like to interfere with me. I'll just ask you first today." Yufan smiled and said, "You are a little bit mean. I don't interfere with you, but you ask me. Then, you are not allowed to go out tonight. If you get out of here, I will fight you." Peng Zhen shook his hands and said, "Don't be angry. Don't be angry. I will leave now." He walked out quickly.
好了，这个故事先说到这里。
欲知后事如何，且听下回分解。